think the biggest thing they're getting wrong is that they're not looking properly at the information that's already available about what makes a difference. So one of the things that people have looked at is, for example, structures of schooling, what kinds of schools make a difference. It's very interesting. If you look at the PISA data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the Program for International Student Assessment shows that the difference between private schools and state-funded schools in almost all the PISA countries is extraordinarily small once you control for the social class effects. So trying to make your schools more like private schools won't do any good, because the private schools aren't any better than the state-funded schools. In England, we've tried things like specialist schools, we've tried academies, and the evidence is that once you control for the differences in money that they're getting, they're exactly the same. In America, charter schools have been touted as an answer for many years. But the evidence from Margaret Raymond, published by Stanford University, suggests that although some charter schools are getting better results than the schools they replace, only 17% of charter schools are actually getting better results. 37% are getting worse results. So the net effect of charter schools has been to lower student achievement. So once you look carefully at the data, you find that these structural solutions have very small effects, and the reason for that is the differences between schools are very small. So if you try to change schools, you're playing with a very small effect, and even if you make a school very good compared to other schools, it'll still be very much of a small effect at the individual student level, because schools don't make that much of a difference. As long as you go to school, in most rich countries, it doesn't matter very much which school you go to. It matters which classrooms you're in and which teachers you get, but which school you go to doesn't matter very much. The school effect in England is about 7%. In the US, it's about 8%. In Finland, it's only about 4%. But these are really quite small numbers. It turns out that the reason for the smallness of school effects is that teacher quality is randomly distributed across the system. What really matters is the quality of teachers in the system, and in most countries, good teachers are found in all kinds of different places. So we've focused on school structures, and they haven't had an impact because the school effect is small. What we now need to do is to focus on the teacher effect, because it's the teacher that really makes the difference. The best teachers generate learning at twice the speed of the least effective, and the worst teachers generate learning at half the speed of the average teacher. So what we need to do is to focus on how do we improve teacher quality.
So if teacher quality is the holy grail, what can policy do to try and drive improvements in teaching quality?
Most policy directives aimed at teacher quality have focused on the extremes of the spectrum. So there are schemes like Teach First, which try to bring in a very small number of highly gifted people into teaching, and other solutions have focused on deselection, or the bottom end, stopping people from getting into the profession, or in more aggressive versions of dismissing or deselecting those who are least effective. The problem is that both of those approaches are dealing with the extremes of the spectrum, and they have very small impact on the entire system. So my analysis suggests that if we're serious about changing the system at scale, we need to address the productivity of every single teacher, and you do that through professional development. The problem with professional development in the past is that it's been focused on accreditation and developing qualifications, and those have a very weak relationship to student progress. So my solution is that we need to change teachers' contracts. Every single teacher working in a public school system, I think, needs to be required to improve their practice. I'm not talking about keeping up with new things. I'm saying that teaching is so hard that you can always get better at it. And rather than following the latest fad, every teacher needs to commit to improving practice every year that they continue to be employed. So what I'm talking about is a culture in every school in which every teacher is accountable for demonstrating every year improvements in their classroom practice. They could do it by video, they could do it by giving interviews with students, where the students talk about things that have changed and have helped them learn more. You could do it with questionnaires. But the idea is that every teacher would know that every year they're going to be required to demonstrate evidence of the improvements they've made in their practice. And so the first requirement would be you have to improve your practice. The second requirement would be you have to be working to get better at something that research shows makes a difference to students. there are lots of snake oil salespeople out there selling ideas like learning styles and brain gym, and these have no impact on student achievement. So it's frankly self-indulgent when schooling is so important for young people, for teachers to be playing around with ideas that won't help their learners. So the top-down bit for my ideal teacher contract is every teacher working in the state system needs to be getting better, and they need to be getting better at something that will benefit their students. That's the end of the top-down bit. The bottom-up bit, up to each individual teacher, therefore, is to decide what they want to work on and to collect the evidence about the facts that they are getting better at what they're doing and be ready to present that once a year in their annual appraisal conversation.
What about the government's idea about increasing the threshold at which people can enter teacher training to have a minimum of 2 degree? Is there much evidence around that?
There is no evidence that teachers with 2.2s are any better than teachers with thirds. The problem with all those kinds of measures is that we end up excluding people who might be very good teachers, and particularly in subjects like mathematics and physics, we might actually not have enough good people to staff our schools. The other point is that those measures take an extraordinarily long time to have effect. If we raise the bar now so that we actually stopped even the lowest performing 30% of teachers from getting into the profession, that would take 35 to 40 years to have an effect, because it would take 40 years before we didn't have anybody still teaching who had got in before the bar was raised. The effects are small, they take a long time to get there. If we could raise the bar for entry into teaching, so we excluded the lowest performing 30%, the net effect of that would, in 30 years' time, would be one extra child passing an exam every 3 years. It's too small an effect. If we wait that long, we will be a third world country before those effects arrive. So that's why I say we have to invest in the teachers we've already got. It's what I sometimes call the love the one you're with strategy. We have to invest and make the teachers we've already got in our schools more productive if we are going to meet the challenge of preparing our young people for the world that they're going to enter.
Final question. One of the big themes at the moment in policy is England's performance against other countries. I just wondered, should England be worried about its assessment in relation to other countries?
International comparisons are problematic. When you translate a test into a different language, you change it in ways that are very hard to predict. So we should always take international comparisons with a pinch of salt. So one of the interesting things is that countries in the United Kingdom have typically done much better on PISA than they have done on TIMSS. And that's partly because the approach of PISA, which is based on problem solving, is better suited to the kind of curriculum we have. However, the broad picture, I think, is that the levels of achievement, particularly in maths and science in this country, are just not good enough for the modern workplace, and therefore we ought to take them seriously, because there are countries with very similar systems to ours that are doing it much better. Now, what we can learn from them is problematic. Finland does very well because teaching is a very high status profession, and the best people in the country very often aspire to be teachers. Singapore, Japan, Korea are also of the same kind. So they have very high quality teachers. Their curricula aren't very much better than ours. So for example, our science curriculum is one that people in other countries often aspire to copy. So we shouldn't assume that because they get better results in science than us, that our curriculum should follow theirs. In fact, the evidence is that they may want to follow ours. So interpreting them takes some judgment and some care. But I think the broad point is that we should pay attention, because although they are not perfect, the fact is it's pretty clear that our students are not doing as well as those in Shanghai, Korea, or Taiwan or Singapore, and we better start doing something about it, because otherwise the high-tech jobs will move there. The old model of the economy was that people in the West would do the head jobs, and the labour would be provided by the people in the Pacific Rim. And what's happening now is that because of the supply of well-qualified people in maths and science, all kinds of high-level work is migrating over there, because that's where the people who could do the work lie. So we need to focus on increasing the levels of skill, just because the world of work is getting more complex. We need everybody with high levels of capability in maths and science, and we need to take those comparisons seriously.